Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Dana DiGregorio. I'm the managing director at Mesh Experience, and I'm going to be leading a discussion with two very amazing women who helped highlight the importance of positive emotion in understanding human behavior. Kim Ihnen is the head of strategy for Starcom US. She's based out of Chicago. And from across the globe, we have Dr. Rachel Laws, who is a social psychologist, an author, and an esteemed semiotician. We're going to be talking with you all about a really interesting research study we did all around understanding the mindset of craving and how things like the desire for food and beverages are much more complex than just passing thoughts. And I'm sure we've felt that before, right? You know, thinking nonstop about a tasty treat, maybe a juicy burger or a refreshing soda. These mental negotiations that we partake in when we're about to indulge is a fascinating moment to understand. And I was privileged enough to do just that with these extraordinary women. But first, let's talk about how we came to be. Kim, tell us a little bit about the human experience thinking at Starcom.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dana. Starcom is the human experience company, and with that comes a commitment to understanding not just what people do, but getting at the why behind their actions. Backed by Publicis Group, we of course have access to best-in-class behavioral data, transaction data, and we subscribe to all the industry's leading tools and services. But custom research is still a critical tool in helping us breathe humanity into our understanding of people. And it's partners like Mesh and semiotics led by experts like Dr. Laws that really help us close that gap and explore the emotions and motivations behind people's actions. I'm excited to say that over the past couple of years, we've partnered on multiple occasions, exploring a range of topics like snacking cravings, the language of identity, and exploring the role of values in category level decisioning. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that this won't be the last time that we partner to round out our understanding of people, categories, and brands.
Thanks, Kim. And just to give everybody a high-level overview of Mesh, we are a full-service research and insights consultancy. We focus all around bringing experiences to life. We live and breathe the fundamental understanding of how experiences make brands better, how they drive and build brands. So whether this is from CX, HX, UX, you know, we just really believe in the power of understanding experiences in the moment and using this data to help marketers make best-in-class decisions about how to grow their brand and better their marketing. And really at the heart of it, it's all around understanding the whole customer. We believe it's our responsibility to humanize data and to bring to life insights that often go overlooked. And given all that Kim has said about HX, you can see why our partnership is really complementary and pretty powerful, and also a lot of fun. So we're going to talk all about understanding positive emotions and behaviors, motivators, and how it can improve marketing. But first, I want to pause and I want to get to know our audience a little bit better. So in that chat function, make sure you're clicking to panelists and audiences. Tell me about your craving moment. I want to understand what sparks or triggers that craving moment. Is it a feeling? Is it a location? Is it a situation? Think about how it starts versus actually the act of eating. You know, what feelings or thoughts are associated with that moment? What are you craving? Tell us in the chat. Boredom, yeah. After a long conference call, yes. Maybe after this one, somebody's going to be craving and indulging. Keep going, keep typing in the chat. Yeah, the late night. And now tell me about the feelings or thoughts that you have if you actually decide to indulge in that craving. So how does it feel after you've, given into that craving? Fred John, I like, now's the time to get some nuts and a piece of chocolate. Oh, Chris is feeling guilty. There's guilt. Satisfaction. Yes, this is so interesting. Keep going, guys. But this is really reiterating a lot of what we saw in our data set. And I'm asking these questions because these were part of a list of questions that we asked participants in our study around cravings. So as a research agency, we often get questions, coming to us around helping to solve business problems. Often it's things like, can you help me understand the effectiveness of my marketing or the shopper journey or CX? But I have to say, this was a little different. Kim's team approached me with the business question, and this is literal, saying, I need to understand why people get off their butts at 10 p.m. to go to Taco Bell and get a chalupa. And I kind of looked at Lori from Kim's team with a blank stare, and she said, no, I'm serious. Can you help explain that to me? What makes a person do that? Kim, can you shed a little bit of light on what was going through your team's head when you approached me with such a question?
Most certainly. And I do want to caveat and be clear, we didn't commission this work on behalf of Taco Bell. Right. But that question was really emblematic of the behavior that we were trying to understand. And given the drivers of this behavior were clearly much more emotional than rational, we just believed it wasn't going to be fruitful to just ask people outright why they did what they did. We needed to unpack the emotional drivers behind their actions and, as responsible marketers, really be able to parse out those positive emotions and drivers from those negative emotions. We had some people in the chat say that they feel guilt or shame. And it was really important that we were able to pull out the people that, when they had cravings and did indulge, had more of a positive response. And to that end, since we're talking about emotions, semiotics was truly the MVP in humanizing our understanding of that snack time crave.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we partnered to build this study, which was an online survey conducted of upwards 1,000 people, but it had a lot of really interesting qualitative questions in there. And so we were able to look at the data from different perspectives and really build stories from what we learned from participants. But let me bring in Dr. Rachel Laws to this conversation, because Rachel, your perspective is always so interesting. And from the get-go, we were noticing and learning things from you about this situation. And we've worked on projects all around consumption in various parts of the world before, but tell us a little bit about some of these motives when it comes to craving consumption.
Hey, Dana. Hey, everybody. Thanks for asking this great question. Okay, guys, so here's the deal, all right. I'm a psychologist, and my speciality is semiotics, which means studying culture and how culture shapes people's behavior. And I have an academic background, so I read a lot of academic literature. And I work with brands and retailers in a lot of different regions of the world. A lot of that is food and beverages, but also healthcare and stuff as well. Right? So the first thing I want to drop on you right now, just because it's really important, is don't feel guilty. Okay, feeling guilty does not correlate with better health or with losing weight. Okay, I'm just going to drop that on you right now for everybody who said that they were feeling guilty. You don't need to. By all means, go ahead and modify your diet, but feeling bad about it doesn't actually correlate with better health. So, give yourself permission to feel better about that. Anyway, that said, here's what I learned about this model you're looking at right here. So this is a commonly used one in academic research that focuses on why people eat. And so what you've got on the left here is physical motives. So I ate because I was feeling hungry. Emotional motives, like I ate because I had some cake because I wanted to feel more cheerful or more, just happier. And then you've got environmental things, which could be a range of things like being able to see an ad or seeing something at point of sale or whatever. So this is a very intuitive and straightforward way of understanding motives. Semiotics is the study of culture, and what semiotics will add to this model is that it helps us to think about the emotional aspects and the environmental aspects in new ways. And we're going to have a lot to say about that over the next few minutes.
Thanks, Rachel. So Kim and I actually worked on this project, which is separate to the CRAVE study, but it's still very relevant. And this was out of Australia, and it was looking at life motivators when it came to consumption and behavior. And between our 3 agencies, because Dr. Law has partnered with us on this as well, we analyzed this data quantitatively and qualitatively through this semiotics lens. And we were looking at this question of which of the following are the most important to you when you think about the beverages that you purchase and choose to drink in a typical week. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about this analysis out of Australia, particularly when we look at rejuvenating senses and how that has anything to do with beverages and consumption.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just speak about this briefly. So I've just kind of prepared you for hearing me talk about culture. Right? So we might think that the benefits that a person can get from eating a snack or from drinking a beverage would be the same all over the world, but in fact there's considerable local and regional and cultural variation, you know. So for example, you know, British people are famous for drinking tea, aren't we? And we, you know, in particular, I think, you know, over time, if we did a survey in the UK, we'd find that perhaps a majority of British people will drink tea and eat biscuits at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And it's just a culturally ingrained habit, and it's part of what we think tea is for and what we think 4 o'clock in the afternoon is for. And here in Australia, we've got a very different picture. I noticed these 2 things together, which are being responsible and rejuvenating my senses. What I want to say about this, I guess, is that we don't need to give this a literal reading and say that literally people are trying to just be more responsible in a very straightforward way. You know, it's more that in just the same way that if you're in the UK, then having a cup of tea and a biscuit becomes a relevant issue about mid-afternoon. When Australian culture thinks about things like beverages, it makes sense to the Australian consumer to think about these things in terms of responsibility, which is essentially quite practical. It's about being able to get things done, is what it's really about. It's quite pragmatic. It's about being able to kind of stay on top of things. And if you look at that stuff over on the left about rejuvenating my senses, if we think about what this word rejuvenating really means, it's about becoming young again. It's about being energetic and optimistic and having the strength to keep doing things. And so with these 2 things together, we've got a particular type of responsibility in Australia, which requires those qualities to achieve. As opposed to, you could imagine any number of other qualities. We could have said, like, what does it take to be responsible? Well, it means that you need the wisdom that comes with age, or it means that you need to be prepared to spend a lot of time sitting down and thinking about things. But what we've got in this Australian picture is a kind of version of responsibility that's quite high energy and is better accomplished if you're in a sort of youthful frame of mind.
Super interesting. Let's go to a different part of the world, Rachel, because we worked on this project as well out of China. And I know I've learned so much from your perspective, but when I look at this slide, I'm seeing a really interesting shift from the Australia data, specifically in this category of confidence in looking good. So what is your interpretation from a semiotics perspective on this odd connection between beverages, confidence, and region?
So this is China, and it's such a big subject. So I'm writing a 2nd book on semiotics right now, and there's a ton of stuff in there about China within respect to retail. But even if you don't, you know, work in the retail sector specifically, we can't help but notice how important China is and how economically powerful and how much it's changing. And if we were going to summarise the whole country into one sentence, rapid change would be it, I think. So there's been this shift from what they call old China to new China for a number of years now, and it's not slowing down. In fact, it's just accelerating and spreading because it's over such a big country. And what you've got then is a kind of emerging demographics of consumers who've got like a little bit of disposable income, and they can access brands, and they're very excited about their homegrown Chinese celebrities and social media influencers, and they're capable of getting very, very excited about things like Double 11, which used to be called Singles Day, which is the big Chinese shopping festival that happens each November that really makes kind of Black Friday look tame in comparison. So there's this massive cultural shift within China, and a part of that has meant that younger generations of Chinese consumers now, essentially they're a kind of bicultural, if you see what I mean. So on the one hand, you've got these residual Chinese values, traditional values like caring for others, like being loyal to your parents, for example, and to your family, and also in a wider sense, being a good citizen and a good member of society continues to be really important. But there's also this other cultural influence, which is more global, much more individualistic, right? Where suddenly there's new pressure on these young individuals to essentially build a brand and develop a kind of inner confidence that comes from knowing that you're unique and special and unlike anybody else, which is quite a Western way of thinking, you know. So there's loads of challenges and things that young Chinese people need to accomplish. And that's what they're telling you about here when they're talking about soft drinks. And you can see how different that is from what's going on in Australia, which is a more stable culture with more kind of steady ideas of what everybody's job is and what everyone's role is in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I should mention that, you know, these life motivators are really important, Kim, to the Ajax framework. You know, we've used these questions in a lot of our research because it's really a part of getting to know the consumer at a much deeper level than just, you know, asking a quick question about which beverages they prefer and, you know, very basic motivators.
Well, right. And even getting beyond kind of the functional RTBs, right? This isn't about, is it taste or refreshment or flavor or packaging, right? Some of the things that we would typically look at when we're talking about kind of the role in decisioning within a category like this. And so really getting at, which we get there through semiotics, the understanding of the real drivers behind some of those choices that we can't extract when we're just asking or we're talking just at kind of the functional benefit level.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat had asked for an explanation on these axes. So I'll provide just like a high level. Dana, feel free to jump in. This is really looking at the importance of different values in life compared to the importance of those values in decisioning within this category.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks, Kim. All right, let's get back to food because I know right now I'm already craving Oreos and French fries. But actually, let's get back to the Crave data out of the States. So it's one thing to ask some qualitative and quantitative questions to, you know, basic analyze and interpret, or maybe even overlay with some AI semiotics, which I want to mention that we did also run on this study. We used AI semiotics in the beginning of our analysis, and it was extremely helpful at identifying some of our cohorts and pulling together some of the open-ended stories that we gathered. But I knew that Kim's team needed to be able to action on this, right? So we had the quantitative design, we had the qualitative insight, and we had the semiotic depth to differentiate and to distinguish. Rachel, why don't you give us a taste about what we learned all around motivators, emotions, and snacking through your lens?
I learned a lot. I'm never going to get tired of hearing people talking about food because it's so rich a topic, you know. So right up front, right at the start of this, you know, you said to people like, what do you like to snack on and how do you feel afterwards? And it was a really interesting split between it makes me feel happy and it makes me feel guilty. And the fact is that both of those things are true, you know. It's just that, as I said, you know, the guilt is not very projective in the sense that it doesn't correlate at all with weight loss or health. However, what it does do that's useful is that it allows people to show that they're aware of the local norms in their culture. Right? So in a lot of countries, there's a real Healthiness is kind of built right into ideology, you know, like you're supposed to be healthy and you're supposed to look healthy and you're supposed to be slim and you're supposed to be all these things, otherwise, you know, you've somehow failed to conform, you know what I mean? And so when people say they're guilty, they feel guilty, in a sense, what's going on there is that they're displaying that they know what they should be doing, you know. The thing is, so then you would think, like, if snacking has got all these problems attached to it, then why do people even do it, you know? Well, the fact is because it works, that's why. Actually, this is the kind of sexy secret in the title that no one is talking about, right? People are not crazy. they a lot of the time eating snacks works, and when I say it works, I mean that it relieves various negative feelings, relieves anxiety and stress, it cheers you up, it relieves heartache, which we can talk about. We definitely heard boredom a couple of times when you asked your question at the beginning. And some of the time, if you're eating the right thing, it can produce an almost ecstatic experience. And people are not imagining that, you know what I mean? It's a real experience, and one that is not talked about that much, which is kind of a shame because it's very emotionally powerful.
For sure. Thanks, Rachel. All right. Let's get into the meat of this data, no pun intended coming from the vegan over here. But we identified through our data set 9 segments of people. And I'm going to go through each of these segments of cravers in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to ask you in the end which you align with. So listen carefully to the descriptors and then just jot down which one are you. The first segment that we identified were the moment makers. These people love to create a small moment throughout the day to unwind and to enjoy a little snack. Sometimes they even went out of their way to go to their special, coffee shop, or sometimes they stuck to their traditional ritual. One person said, I always order a Dunkin' Donuts coffee muffin to have with my coffee, and I feel like I can relax and read a book or a newspaper with my coffee and muffin. The second were the pantry lovers. So these people keep their favorite foods at home and they rely on their kitchen items to satisfy these cravings. One person said, I have a habit of hoarding meats and vegetables and other frozen products, in addition to canned goods and other staples that have a long shelf life to indulge on. So they like to be prepared for their snacks. The third is instant gratification. And that's just it. These people will eat food that they crave in the moment if it's readily available. One participant said, it's just usually on impulse. I feel great. My cravings are satisfied and my stomach is full. The fourth was this taste and texture seeking group. And on the surface, they claimed no real reason except pure hunger in terms of what led to their craving. But as we dove a little bit deeper into the qualitative, we realized that this idea of different types of textures and tastes are really, really alluring for this group. One person said, I have a craving for a hamburger. And if I decide to go, I really hope the hamburger stays hot so I can bring it home and add all of my delicious condiments. Number 5 was ice cream addicts. I'm sure there's some of you among us. This cohort, after dinner treats that can be really rewarding at the end of the day. One participant said, my craving is relaxing in the evening after having done what I plan to do or did not plan to accomplish during the day. So they're going to have that ice cream regardless. Number 6 was hunger pangs. And this was an interesting group because they really had cravings for big meal items. They like to go to restaurants because they're going to get their food. It's going to be tasty. It's going to be hot, and there's no fuss. They don't have to make it. They can just go, and it's very reliable. And also, they really enjoy the experience of eating as much as the act of eating. So one person said, I'm craving right now a juicy steak with mushrooms and au jus. It's cooked to perfection and it's piping hot. Number 7 was sweet tooth. So this group, they just like a quick treat like chocolate throughout their day that's going to bring them a moment of happiness and pleasure. One person said, I have the feeling of hunger for sweets, and when I finally get chocolate, I have a happy feeling within. So that really quick moment. And then we get to the emotional eaters. And these people often eat for an energy boost, and sometimes it's out of stress and anxiety. Most likely it's out of stress and anxiety. One person said in response to, how your craving is triggered, stress is probably the worst to trigger my craving, especially for junk food. My mental energy depletes rapidly and I need something fast for energy. And then finally, we've got the guilty snackers. We've already seen some of you here, but guilty snackers will tend to indulge in cravings to feel good in the moment, but they feel some guilt in partaking in that unhealthy, quote unquote, unhealthy habit. One person said, I always indulge in my cravings because I have so little self-control. And sometimes I feel bad that I indulge. However, I still indulge. So who are you? I've got some responses coming through the chat. Tell me who you are. I definitely think I'm an instant gratification person because I usually wait too long to indulge and then I have no control. If it's in front of my face, I'm going to eat it and I'm going to feel great about it. Kim, what about you? Who are you?
Well, as you, Dana, and Rachel have heard me talk about Trader Joe's, I'm a Trader Joe's devotee, and I really fall into the pantry lover segment. At any point in time, you can open up my freezer, and it's full of all of my family's favorite Trader Joe goodies. And my kids are even trained now when they have a craving to just kind of open up the freezer and kind of inventory what's there. And truly understanding these segments and at a high level and how their crave and snacking moments differed was valuable in and of itself, right? Just like going through those rich descriptions really provided a layer of strategic support and direction for us. But underneath this segmentation is an incredible depth of data, which helped us better understand really that mindset of the craver, not just why they snacked and how they snacked, even when they snacked. We were able to, because of our use of semiotics, get to the emotions behind segments like hunger pains, and also understand where they look for food inspiration. So rather than just kind of explain a little bit more about kind of the data that sat behind this, we'll take a quick look at it in more detail.
Great. I love Fred's snack without guilt ad slogan. I love this. Kim, tell us a little bit more as we started to kind of slice and dice some of these segments.
Yeah, so we pulled out here the segment of instant gratification as an example to kind of walk you through. This segment was extremely interesting to us. They're those people that experience these sudden, intense cravings, like seemingly out of nowhere. And the act of snacking for them serves as this positive reset. I would say even more so than just understanding that it was a positive reset for them, this research allowed us to get at kind of the emotional composition of that positivity, and the emotion with the greatest share for this segment instant gratification is joy. And so for us, as we think about going from like insights to activation, this really points to the tone, for example, that we would want to reflect in any content or creative that we would use to connect with this audience. The intensity of their cravings to us signal that they often grab what's on hand. And as you can imagine then, for some of our CPG clients, this highlighted the importance of connecting with this audience before that moment of craving strikes, so that when they go to the pantry, the fridge, the freezer, our brands would already be there for them to grab when that craving strikes. And lastly, we were able to analyze this segment and all of these segments on common demographic breaks, which was a really helpful input for us as we think about things like informing channel and partner selection.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really resonating with the intense urge that somebody's mentioning up there. Sweet.
Yeah, and understanding this and all the other cohorts and the emotions associated with their crave was really complemented by additional inputs regarding what they're craving, right? Is it sweet? Is it salty? Is it savory? When they are craving, which you can imagine kind of in the world of media has really big implications, and how often they crave and consume different category of snacks. because this data was absolutely critical in assessing a product level opportunity and shaping a tactical go-to-market approach.
Yeah. Okay, we talked a bit about some of these pillars, but I want to dive in deeper around the situations, the emotion, the context all around craving that we uncovered through semiotics. And truly understanding what lies beneath was the goal of this study. It's what we set out to do, because I wouldn't have been able to answer that first question from Kim's team if we didn't. But, you know, snacking and craving, it's much more than just that random thought, as I said. Even though sometimes it often seems that way. So Rachel, I know we talked a little bit about emotional eating in a few slides previous, but tell us about some of these permissions that you're alluding to here on this slide.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to do that. So, you know, if most people here are sort of viewing from the United States or from another English-speaking country, then you may be very familiar with this concept of emotional eating. So familiar with it, you've heard it so many times that it may have started to seem natural. You might be in danger of thinking that everybody does it, but it's very culturally specific, right? Not every culture around the world is constantly introspecting about its own eating habits and how that lines up with its emotional state. Okay, that's a certain type of behavior that's very common in the UK, the US, Australia, not so much in other places. And I think that's a really important kind of point of reference here, right? So what we've got here is a situation where on the one hand, people benefit from this concept of emotional eating because it allows you to sort of set up a whole framework of different occasions and different reasons for eating that will give you permission to consume yummy stuff, right? Whatever it may be, right? It's not usually celery, is it? You know, it's emotional eating. It's normally things like, you know, there's a whole category of comfort foods, like stodgy, rich foods. There's warming winter foods. There's foods which remind me of childhood. There's the respondent you mentioned earlier. I always have a particular brand of donut with my coffee. There's joy in mass market brands. If we've got any Australians on the line, I just want to say that I'm aware how much Australian consumers love Tim Tams. They provide this really satisfying experience for emotional eating, right? And people in general, people like things that are kind of sweet and dairy, right? I once heard it said when coffee shops really started to make an impact in the UK and were avidly taken up and are full of customers, that British people don't really like coffee. What we like is coffee flavoured milk. This was a revelation for me. We're all just walking around with these big sweet lattes, you know. So this concept of emotional eating sets you up for being able to indulge in all these amazing things, right? And I'll give you a bunch of reasons for eating all these things, right? And it's kind of in contrast to environmentally triggered eating of the sort that is perhaps more common in some Asian countries, for example, where you might eat because it's that time of day, or you eat because you passed a kiosk and they sell the exact thing that you like, so you take up the offer.
Super interesting. What about compensation? Rachel, tell me, what the heck does compensation have to do with any of this?
I think this is massive. So if we've got people on the line who kind of see a lot of social media, there was this phrase doing the rounds on social media not that long ago, which is procrastination, revenge, bedtime. So this is a Chinese concept. It's a 3-character word. It's a very useful term. And what it describes is an occasion of staying up late at night, even though you know you've got work tomorrow, you know that you've got to get up and function, but you deliberately stay up way past your bedtime, knowing that you're going to be a mess tomorrow, in order to try and claw back some personal time and some control over your time and what you do with your life, essentially from your employer. Right. And I think this is a useful concept that kind of caught on internationally because so many people are almost worked to death, you know. So many of us work excessively long hours. And so sabotaging yourself, your own performance the next day can sometimes be a worthwhile trade-off, right? And so I want to say that I kind of, if it doesn't if you haven't noticed already, that I feel a lot of sympathy for consumers. I think people have a lot to deal with. They've got large responsibilities. They do large amounts of paid and unpaid work. They're constantly being told that they need to change, you know, that they need to be more resilient. They need to be more successful. They need to lose 40 pounds and all these different things. I think people do bloody well under the circumstances, you know, and I see compensation involved in food and various other nice things like shopping on Amazon and stuff like that, that helps people to feel better about their lives and cope better with all these different things that are demanded of them.
Yeah, almost like a value trade.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this slide, Rachel. The
I will.
cravings that kick in at night.
This is really interesting. So time of day exerts a huge effect on what kinds of things can be eaten and also what kind of behaviours can happen. And I don't just mean that in some obvious sense, like you have breakfast cereal at breakfast time, right? Or that, you know, if you don't drink gin until it's at least sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, those types of cultural rules, right? It goes beyond that. It's about this whole different, so you'd be surprised how much different times of day, especially night time, when almost allow different personalities to take over, you know? So for a lot of people with kids, it's once you've got the kids in bed, once darkness has fallen and the kids are in bed, you can transform into the person that you were before you had kids. And you can eat spicy food and food with loads of salt in it, and you can drink alcohol, and you can enjoy more sophisticated forms of entertainment and all that stuff, right? Also, back in the day, when I used to do full-time academic work many years ago, when I was first starting out in my academic career, I actually wrote an academic paper about lunchtime. And it was about how people with those types of 9-to-5 jobs, lunchtime is like this kind of vague amount of time. Like it could be, oh, I'll be back at my desk in half an hour, or it could be something that you could stretch out to a couple of hours. So it's got this built-in flexibility into it, you know. And also in a lot of places in Europe, it's kind of acceptable to drink alcohol at lunchtime if you're in the right setting. So lunchtime is a very flexible concept that on the one hand can mean just sitting in front of your computer eating a pre-packed sandwich from some supermarket, or it can also facilitate going out with a business associate to a restaurant, drinking and even engaging in illicit activity before eventually wandering back to work. So these kind of times of day cues, like, oh, it's lunchtime, or oh, it's nighttime, evening has fallen, are really powerful and will set the stage for a whole theatre activities in which consuming snacks and certain types of beverages is one of those things that's on the menu. So what we've got then is, I want to say a little few words at this point about the kind of work from home demographic who've had an interesting time during the pandemic, haven't they? So I've worked from home for many years, but many of my colleagues in the marketing industry found themselves working from home for the first time. And at first people thought it was great, you know, they were like, this is great, I can wear pajama bottoms, I can get up half an hour later, I don't have to commute anymore, I've just saved myself 2 to 4 hours a day in travelling time, and it was all going to be amazing, right? And it was for a few weeks. But then there's this somehow law of nature, of physics, which says that work will expand to fill the time available. And before too long, people found that they were working more hours than ever, right? And there's the whole demographic of people now where it's no longer clear where work stops and play begins. You know, it used to be kind of finish your office job or the factory and sort of clock out and go home. It's not so much the case anymore, you know. For a lot of people, they're kind of trapped in front of their workstations all day, and it's not so much that there's an end point, it's just that there's this gradual decline in productivity. The quality and amount of work that's being done gradually starts to go on a decline from about 4 o'clock onwards, but it might continue for another 6 hours, you know, until at the end of that time, there's basically nothing being accomplished. You're just sort of messing around on Twitter and watching reruns of terrible sitcoms and ordering stuff you don't need on Amazon. And eventually it's 2 a.m. and it's procrastination, revenge, bedtime.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm relating right now. Rachel, before you say anything, I just want to know, what about this image seems so relatable? I mean, hasn't everybody, or at least somebody you know, or a woman, probably in particular, cried themselves into a tub of ice cream while, wiping tears and continuing to binge? So why is that?
Ice cream. Let's talk about ice cream. Raise your hand if you've seen the Bridget Jones movie, or if you haven't seen it. Bridget Jones taught a whole lot of women of a certain demographic that if you've experienced romantic disappointment, then what you should do is buy a tub of ice cream and eat it straight from the tub with a spoon. But in fact, it's not just Bridget Jones, happens to be one of the most famous examples. But in actual fact, if you were to go, guys, not that I want to send you away from this webinar, but if you were to go on Google on your phone right now, on Google Images, and type eating ice cream while crying, there are hundreds and thousands of these images, right? And why? It's because it's become established as a kind of culturally available idea, partly thanks to these types of Hollywood movies, And what we're looking at here looks like a stock photo. And the fact that this idea that ice cream and heartbreak go together is now available in stock photo libraries, that tells you something, right? They wouldn't make it available if it didn't mean something, if people didn't want to use it, right? So I guess what I want to say about what does this have to do with the environment? Well, when we looked at right at the beginning at that model, and I said that this is a model that's common in academic research, right? Where we're talking about motives for eating stuff. We've got the physical motives, like I feel hungry. We've got emotional motives, and we now know quite a lot about how multi-layered and complex the emotional part is, right? And then we've got environmental triggers, which usually in these types of studies, it will mean things like, my watch says it's time to eat at lunchtime, or it could be something like a point of sale display, right? So what I want to say at this point about what semiotics adds to this idea of the environmental trigger is that the environmental triggers are way, way larger than just the time on your watch or an ad appearing on TV or some roadside kiosk that sells the thing that you like, right? All those are environmental triggers, but there's much more to it than that as well, right? And because we've got connections throughout all of our cultures around the world which link random things like heartbreak and ice cream. Now what happens is, if you dumped by your boyfriend is the classic occasion for this food item, if that now becomes an environmental trigger, and that means that the correct thing to do now is to go to the grocery store and buy ice cream, and it works. It's going to, if it didn't work, people wouldn't do it, right? So the environment is much more layered and complex than we think it is. And one of the good things about semiotics is that it will help you to recognise these types of things as environmental triggers, which we otherwise wouldn't have thought of. They would have been a bit neglected.
Yeah, these cultural hardwirings that happen. I think, Kim, we were talking about the hardwiring of fall and pumpkin spice in the States, right? Because
I mean, the second it turns cold, even a couple degrees, I'm craving that pumpkin spice latte. But this also explains kind of that relationship that Corona, for example, is created with the beach, right? You do something consistently enough for long enough, you can work to create those mental structures for consumers. It's what Starbucks did. It's what Corona has done. It's what Bridget Jones's Diary did for the ice cream industry, right? So the role of not just advertising, but content more broadly plays a huge role in those crave triggers.
Yeah, exactly. And the environmental and occasion triggers too, really needing to understand those. Rachel, I think we've got this one last slide for you to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'm sure that nearly all of us here on the call work in marketing, and therefore you're going to easily recognise this journey that we've got depicted here, which is a little bit similar, isn't it, to the kind of classic sort of marketing funnel. So first you've got awareness, perhaps through something like an ad, becoming aware that this thing exists. Then you've got consideration, and then finally you've got action at the end where the person makes a purchase, right? So what I want to say about this is that, like most of these classic models in marketing, it's fundamentally correct, but there's always semiotics will always add a kind of extra layer of nuance to our familiar ways of thinking about things. And here it's this consideration bit of the marketing funnel that I want to talk about in connection with semiotics, because normally if we were talking about the classic marketing funnel, we'd say, well, you've got awareness, then consideration. Well, consideration of what, right? Well, consideration, maybe I'm choosing between competing brands, right? Like, do I want a Starbucks coffee, or do I want Costa or Cafe Nero or some other brand, right? Or it could be something like, we might acknowledge that people are choosing between different types of products within a category, right? So do I want coffee or tea, or do I want a Coca-Cola, right? Or at most we might allow that people can regard things like pizza and a burger as being in the same consideration set, right? But what we don't really talk about, and I think we should talk about a bit more in marketing that semiotics helps us with, is what else that consideration stage involves, which is where we're kind of exploring these cultural connections that we've learned, imagining, remembering things, fantasizing. Do you know there was that really popular movie, Bridesmaids, with Chelsea Handler, that did so well? And there's a scene in that where she's experiencing kind of 30-something singleton loneliness and disappointment, and makes herself an elaborate cupcake at home, you know. And so that didn't happen by accident. It's part of this culturally informed activity where you actually think about your emotional state and what's happening in your life. And you run through a list of things which are which your culture has decided are going to make you feel better, which could be a really beautiful cupcake, for example, just for one person, to, as an act of self-love, to let you know that you think that you're special, that you know that you are cared for, that type of stuff. So for me, all of my career, all of my kind of business activity and career really is in this middle section here. And once you've really got a grip on that, you can do whatever you want with it. You can design better brands, better advertising campaigns, you can design better in-store displays, and so on and so on.
Interesting. Love that movie. Kristen Wiig, not Chelsea, Kristen Wiig, yeah. Okay, so from my end, when I think of some of the key implications and actions, the first was really that to truly understand consumer behavior, we have to acknowledge that it's really, really complex. There are these cultural and societal pressures that are impacting on how we live, how we show up, and the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. And then the second is that the use of language and emotion and context is critical. It's absolutely critical in understanding the moment of the decision, right? And leaning into these principles will elevate your marketing. Mesh and Starcom, we both truly believe in using an experience framework to uncover insights about the whole consumer, and to use the positive experiences to drive behavior change that's not temporary, but that lasts. Kim, I'm sure that our viewers are pretty interested to know, the key implications from your end on this research for Starcom.
Yeah, well, we believe that insights and strategies should be in service of driving growth for our clients. And this work really helped us dimensionalize where the business opportunity was, both in size, because we were able to size out all of our different cohorts, but also where there was alignment between a cohort's desires and a brand's value proposition. Beyond supporting high-level strategic decisioning like that, though, the work was so rich qualitatively and quantitatively that it really did serve as a playbook for what we needed to say, to what segments, and even when we needed to do that to unlock that business opportunity. And lastly, but actually pretty importantly, it has served as a really helpful tool for portfolio management, both at like a corporation level as well as at an individual brand level where there's different products and SKUs that deliver on different need states.
Awesome. And probably, I mean, your team, your business, you're used to, having a lot of information at your fingertips, a lot of syndicated data, but this is also a good reminder of, why to go deeper, to really go underneath the surface, you've got to do something custom. You've got to be a little bit innovative. So it was a really fun project to partner on with you. Okay, I'd love to hear from you all. Feel free to use the chat, send us some questions. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes to have some Q&A. While we're waiting for some to come in, Rachel, I have one question for you. And I'm wondering, how much does being alone versus being with your friends or your family influence our behavior when it comes to indulging in the emotion around craving? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah. So being with people is a major environmental trigger in itself, So I'm sure we've all had this experience where, you go home and visit your family of origin and, your mum will always serve at this particular dish or type of food for a family meal. But then you've got a friend from work who you go out with a couple of times a month and you guys always have this particular type of thing, And so everybody will recognise that people are triggers for eating certain types of food, just like occasions are. And when people are alone, there's no way of ever being completely alone, to be honest with you, in a consumer society, because you carry it with you everywhere you go, But when you're at home, in a sense, you don't have other people making this immediate impact on what you're eating, and so we've got a more undisturbed relationship with these cultural ideas. You know what I mean? So let's say that not to put too fine a gloss on it. If I were feeling romantically disappointed and I wanted to eat a bunch of ice cream, all things considered, it might be better if I do that alone, just because I'm going to be able to immerse myself in the whole experience a bit more. You know what I mean? It's a reflective activity, eating ice cream while crying. I'm going to be able to immerse myself in the experience a little bit more. And if you've got other people there, the other people are going to say things like, let's have a gin and tonic, or how about nachos? And suddenly it's a different kind of occasion, Now it's a social occasion. So I think when people are alone, you're never really alone in the sense that the cultural influences don't go away, but you can kind of engage with those cultural influences in a deeper, more immersive manner because you haven't got this immediate chatter and social impact.
Yeah, and I also remember when we were going through this analysis, we were looking at a couple very interesting words that had been used. One was just, and the other was but. Yeah. And those were used interchangeably to justify, this thinking that I might be indulging in a burger, but I just ran 3 miles. So it's kind of like telling us that, I know how to act reasonably in society. I know that this isn't now how I should be eating, but I've run my 3 miles and so I should be rewarded. And those really interesting learnings, I know I personally took away and apply when I'm reading other open-ended comments for other studies.
There's some runners are like that. So running is a sport that is, people are sometimes thought of as being a bit, shall we say, virtuous or even worthy, or dare I say it, boring, right? And one way that runners, serious runners, will compensate for that is there's a segment of runners who will go, I just like food. That's why I run. Because if I run marathons, I thought I could eat like a horse and that's what makes me happy. You see what I mean? And it's a way of sort of recovering yourself as a runner and becoming more interesting again. Like, you know what I mean? Now you're no longer that guy that obsesses about running. Now you're that guy that loves pasta and can eat more pasta than anyone you've ever met,
Interesting.
Inherently, majority of our decisions are emotional, and we just then use the language to rationalize what inherently is an emotional decision.
It is, yeah. Kim, a question about the different segments and how they relate to different product categories.
Yeah, one of the really interesting and helpful pieces of data that we were able to collect is for each of the segments, what are they more likely to crave? So you saw taste and texture, for example, really skew towards more savory, right, products. And then we were also able to, across different snack categories, break down the frequency at which they crave and consume. So understanding kind of at a macro level, is this more of a sweet to salty or savory occasion, combined with some of that more granular crave and consumption data, really helped us pinpoint then across, an entire, say, CPG company, or down even to the product level where we've got different SKUs, really where the right opportunity was at the segment level.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with some of the additional work that we did on, globally when we're looking at other product categories that were maybe non-alcoholic beverages or some even non-food products that people were desiring to change or to be better, to be different. So it was really interesting. And I loved when we did that segment on time of day, what they were going for, how often were they consuming some of our foods. A friend made a good comment in the chat all around, the rationale that we do to give ourselves permission to indulge, right? So it's not, we know it's not healthy or acceptable, but we're giving ourselves those permissions. And I think, we absolutely saw that throughout this work. And what's more interesting is the application of semiotics and in understanding form and function of language. We've seen it on categories that are much bigger than just consumption and eating. And we hope to bring that webinar to you guys someday too. But it is really, really interesting how cultural and societal pressures impact the way that we talk. I've certainly learned so much from Rachel about not just taking something at its surface, not just taking a comment at its surface, but really understanding how people have, put their sentence together and the choice words that they have made, what that means, what that means behind and below the surface. We are just about at time. I want to thank everybody for joining. It's been a pleasure to deliver this work to everybody. We've loved working on this. We talk about it all the time. We reference this all the time. I know Kim and her team does as well. So thank you all for joining. If there are questions after the fact, please feel free to email any of us. We will respond. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.